we're just going to do a quick bit of sketching today, walking out of the gallery, see what's on the doorstep. If you head out, just having a quick look at our protective gel and floor markings and everything that we now have to have. Still, it's nice to be open again. Across the arcades here, and let's have a look what's on the doorstep. Looking across the square here, we've got this rather nice little medieval building just straight across from us. So we'll have a go at sketching that in a portrait format. So I've got my sketchbook here. It's full of 300-gram watercolour paper. Nice little sketchbook, hardback. Nearly full now. Various bits of sketches of the areas of France. And I'm going to be using these permanent ink markers today by Staedtler. They're 0.1 and 0.3 are perhaps the ones I use the most. I think 0.1 today probably, because we do quite a small sketch. That paper's A5 size if anyone's interested. Okay, let's make a start. I'm going to start off with the roof line of the building across the way there. Working straight on the paper with the ink. That roof line will give me an idea of the proportions of the rest of the building, so it should help me to get everything more or less to the right size. Slight downside of using the permanent markers, of course, is that if you make a mistake or put a line in the wrong place, then you're stuck with it. So it does force you to sort of focus a little bit more while you're drawing, I think. Anyway, let's get the gutters in. I'm not going right across there because I'm not quite sure where this tree is going to go yet. The tree on the right. So then get these little windows in, just very, very quickly. The whole idea with this today really is just to show you how quickly we can actually get a sketch down. I've got a sketching course coming up at the gallery in the middle of August, so if anyone's interested, please go on the website and have a look for some details. So there we are with our first little window. And once we get the window in, it'll help us get the windows underneath because they're all nicely lined up, and this wooden filling for the building helps us keep things in line as well. So we'll just set a hint of the other window because part of it's going to be blocked by this tree. So now I've got a pretty good idea where this tree needs to go. I'll just put in a little bit of leaf around the side. Just finish off the roof now. Now I know where it's going to. Right, and off we go with the window underneath. Just a little bit of wooden infilling there, which helps us get everything in line. And I know now that my windows are straight underneath there, and there's also the shutters. The shutters should be fairly easy because each should be about half the width of the window. So we'll just get those in. Just doing this demonstration today really so that you can see how quickly you can work. This is done without any stops, any pauses, any cuts for anything, so this is exactly the time that it's taken me to draw it. You're watching the whole thing, although apologies if it gets a bit boring from time to time. So there we are, getting the little wooden dividers for the window panes in, and that'll do. The next window across, there is another one to the right of it, but we're only going to see a little bit of a hint of the shutter there behind the tree. What I was saying before about making a few mistakes, you'll see there's a line going across the top of from shutter to shutter here that doesn't really exist, but we'll just have to paint over that and hope it doesn't show up too much in the final sketch. Now I've got that lower window in, I should be able to work out where the the bottom of the building is, and the sides, and where that tree on the left's going to go, quite a dark tree. So that's going to be the bottom of that story, and then underneath that we've got a couple of shops and an old medieval arcade, and these two or three stone pillars that are holding it all up. Pillar to the left again has a bush mostly in front of most of it, so I'll get a little bit of the stone in, and then the start of the bush, I don't quite know where it's going to end yet because I haven't got the ground in, so let's have a look. Again, this round pillar, more or less in the middle of the sketch. Very nice feature, but it's difficult to make it look round because I'm looking more or less straight at it, so I'm not getting a lot of perspective on there, but I'll try and put in a bit of stone work just to give it an idea of some roundness. And now I've got the rest of that in, I can put the floor in, get the base, and then a little bit of the stone on the edge of the pillar to the left. I'm just going to put a little bit in just to suggest a little bit of stonework, but I'm not going to try and draw in every stone. There's a nice little light there, which is a nice little feature. It's a fairly modern light, but it's designed to look quite old, so I'll get that in. I probably won't bother with the drain pipe. I don't think it adds much to the building. And then to draw in just the way you can see the little ends of the pan tiles that are coming down there. It might help my roof look a bit more realistic when we get down to it. A bit of ridge tiles there. And then the roof is steepish and then flattens out a bit, kind of halfway down, so I'm going to put in a few light lines there to help give it that idea. And then I think the final bit of this sketch will put in a little bit of the underneath of the arcade. We can see there's a sign, so I'll put that in. And then there are some tables underneath, which I'm going to try and leave quite white because I want those to stand out against the shade of the building. They've got some little knickknacks on them, some wicker baskets and so on that are being sold, so I'll perhaps put in a few marks there to give the idea that there's something on top of them. And finally there's a bit of another stone pillar we can see just to the right. Again, mainly hidden by a tree, but there we go. And I think that'll do for a quick sketch. So now I'm going to be using one of these water brushes to add some colour. It's got a lot of water in the handle, so it's just a quick squeeze will release some water. And then my paint pot here is Winsor and Newton pocket palette. There's a few colours in there, don't need many for this. No, indeed for most watercolour paintings. If anyone's interested, that's the top, bottom and middle row of the paints there. There's two ultramarines because one of them is nearly exhausted, so I've just put an extra one in for when it runs out. To start with the sky, because it's at the top of the picture, and I'm going to try and work down over the sketch as much as possible so I'm not leaning on anything I've just painted. Water brushes are great usually for very quick sketches, but not brilliant I find for putting on big areas of even colour, so the sky is probably going to be about the most difficult piece here because I'm trying to work quite quickly. It's also extremely hot today. The gallery is very quiet, which is why I'm doing this. It's about 38 degrees outside and about 30 degrees inside, so it's a pretty warm day. I'm just trying to work across that. This isn't a very traditional watercolour way of doing a wash, but it's the best I can do with a water brush and sketchpad sort of propped up at quite an angle. This is just done in French ultramarine, the blue I'm using, just pure ultramarine. It's going to dry a bit lighter as well as it dries, and hopefully it's going to, as the sketchpad's at an angle, it's going to mingle a little bit and mix a bit more as it dries. Okay, the next colour I'm going to do, if I was working strictly top to bottom, would be the roof, but I don't want the roof to start bleeding into the sky. So I'm going to do a little bit of the brickwork around the windows first, and then I can come back to the roof once the sky is dry. So a little bit of raw sienna mixed with burnt umber. Just dot in a couple of other stronger bits of either burnt umber or raw sienna, so it starts to mix a little bit and give me that pleasing sort of watercolour effect. Okay, working mainly around the wooden struts. I could just paint straight over them, I suppose, and put some dark brown on top of them, but I just prefer this. It makes me think about where they're going to go and gives a bit of white underneath as well, which is always nice. Stops the colours getting too muddy. So hopefully this rogue line that went in earlier will start to disappear under some colour now. There's a richer colour, which I think is nicer, so I'm going to go back and apply that to the other brick areas as well. Bearing in mind it is going to lighten as it dries, so if it looks a bit too dark, it should come out alright. The way I put colour on like this, it tends to look like a fairly flat sketch until you get towards the end, and then I add some shade in, which kind of should hopefully give it a bit more sort of depth and roundness. There's a bit of plaster work underneath this window, so that's a slightly different colour and a more even colour. And then working down onto the pillar underneath with just a lighter bit of the same colour. Now this round pillar, I'm going to give it some colour on the right hand side, which is in shade, and then I'm going to try and feather that a little bit so it should give it some degree of roundness. Feels like the sky's dried there, so we'll get some roof on. Using a lot of strokes that follow the direction of the tiles, and then just across for the ridge tile, and then a few horizontal strokes to look a bit more like the individual tiles, though we're not going to spend an awful lot of time drawing in individual tiles here. The idea with this is we'd just be doing a sketch, 20-25 minutes, and then moving on. A bit of a darker colour in there while it's all still wet, so it'll mingle a bit with the colour that's on to start with. Give some idea of the bits of patches of shade in the roof. Then we can start getting in now these little wooden pieces in the building. These will be kind of a browny grey colour, so I'll use a raw umber mixed with a little bit of French ultramarine there, which will go slightly greyish. and a dark mix now in the middle of the windows, trying to leave a bit of white around the edge where the actual sides of the window are, but the panes, particularly in the top, are going to be quite dark. This will be a mixture of ultramarine and burnt umber. And then as we come down a bit, the panes lighten up a little bit, so I'm going to mix a bit more ultramarine in there and also a bit more water, so it comes on a bit paler. Gives us the idea that they're reflecting the sky a little bit more. Okay, mixed up a very light green now with a bit of lemon yellow and ultramarine. And to get the tree in, I'm putting quite a lot of water on here so it stays pretty wet, because I want to put a darker green on as well so it'll mix and mingle a little bit. Using quite sort of random short brush strokes here to help give us that leafy effect. And here we go, mixing in a darker green now. It's just increased the amount of ultramarine. I could put a bit of burnt umber in there as well if I wanted to get it really, really dark in the shaded areas. But a bit more ultramarine will help it go nice and dark. Don't want to spend too long on this because we're going for speed as well as reasonable accuracy. Tree to the right, a little bit darker, so I'm starting off with a darker green, and I'm going to add a bit more dark green, and particularly as we go down where it's shaded most underneath it. Okay, filling in the left-hand building. Should perhaps have done that before I did the tree, but there we are. Slightly browner, more reddy brown roof to the left-hand side, so I'll get that in with a bit of light red and a touch of burnt umber again. Doing the gutters. Again, this ultramarine burnt umber mix gives us some quite nice greys. And then just a hint of colour on the shutters. They are virtually white, but they are a kind of like very, very pale blue. Difficult to see on the photo in the screen, I know. Just finishing off some of the woodwork, getting the big lintel supporting the building, and then use some of that colour as well to go underneath. Okay, just putting a bit of ground in. I'll use a bit of burnt umber and cobalt violet for this. It gives it a nice pebbly kind of feel. And then a darker brown at the back for the shops. This is all going to be in shade, so not too much detail necessary. Just make sure we avoid putting paint on the where the tablecloths are and on the pillars. Leaving a space for that tree trunk as well. Same time, just a bit of that stony colour, a bit of raw umber again, and raw sienna on the burnt umber and raw sienna on the walls, and touch in that tree trunk. That's going to be mostly in shade as well by the time we're finished, so don't need to worry too much about it at the moment. And then just some blobs of a very dark mix of again French ultramarine and burnt umber, just some dots to suggest those pan tiles, and finish off blocking in that bush that's covering most of the pillar on the left. And use a bit more of that colour to strengthen the tree on the left a bit. Quick clean up of the part of my palette. The only thing with these very small palettes is you can't mix a lot of colour on them. Now I'm going to mix up a shade that I'm going to use for my shadow, and for this I'm using the French ultramarine, alizarin crimson, and a little bit of burnt umber. Burnt umber just sort of takes the edge off it, stops it being too bright purple. And I'm looking for a kind of a bluey, a dark bluey kind of hue, which I'm just going to wash over what I've already painted in the shadowed areas. It's quite a quick and I think quite effective way of getting shadows to work. So starting at the top, because that's nice and dry as well, we'll just put one sweep if we can of shade colour over there, and then I don't want to disturb the paint underneath as little as possible, so I don't want to end up lifting it off the paper. I don't want streaky shadows. Then we'll work down at the shadows in the windows. Sun now is on the top left as you look at it, so it's going to be casting shadow down from left to right. So I'll be a bit behind that window there, that shutter, and just underneath a bit. We want really all of the under the arcade in shadow, so I'm going to use the same shadow colour and just put that behind everything there. Where I've put a darker colour initially, it'll just make the shadow a bit darker as well. There we go, that tree trunk mostly in shadow. I'll just leave a little bit exposed, gives it a nice bit of contrast, and the same with this pillar here. I'm going to get some shadow down one side of it, but to help it not look quite a square, I'm going to feather that a little bit. So hopefully again adds to this impression of roundness that we're trying to give. There's a bit of shadow coming down off that light hitting the wall, so we'll just put a little bit of that on top. And also in these top windows. And there we go. That'll do. We're about 23 minutes, I think, of drawing and painting time. If you'd like to come sketching in Montflanken, a beautiful area of France, do get in touch. Course in August, but there'll be other things throughout the year. Thanks for watching.